afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Jocelyn's Growing Group, and I'm glad to say that we are starting on time today. Worked through those technical difficulties from last week, and I'm really excited about the topic that we have today. The idea of starting your own seeds is so exciting. And it's something that is awesome for this time of year when it's too early to get outside. We've probably already babied our house plants such that they're sick of us, handling them. So starting your own seeds, whether it's just a few or all the plants you're planning to grow, is a great activity that you can essentially get going on now, depending on the variety. And it'll really see you through until the end of the indoor growing season when we're able to start moving outside. So with that in mind, I am going to share my screen and we will get started. So for those of you who are new, we always like to start with a bit of a hello, of course, and then we like to do some quick intros. So we do have time for that today. And so if you are new or recurring to our Jocelyn's Growing Group, we'd love for you to introduce yourself if you're so inclined. It's not necessary. And then after that, we'll be quickly reviewing the high level important knowledge that we've gained over the last few weeks, and then dive into seed starting. And there is lots of content, lots to talk about today. So there's going to be plenty of discussion there, lots of learning. And then we will be looking to next week as well. Of course, we have our weekly promotion offer for those of you that have joined us today, only for you, of course. And we've also updated the topic schedule going forward a little bit to rearrange some of the topics to better calibrate with the season. So stick around for all of that. As always, I am very lucky to have Kat Sabata here with our, I think she's listed as me as well, but she's certainly not me. She's a big help behind the scenes. She does moderate. She'll be watching the chat. So if you do have questions at any point, you can throw them in the chat. If Kat can answer them quickly, she will. Otherwise, we will excuse me, have time to answer them at the end. We always leave time for Q&A. So I would love to know if you would like to introduce yourself or say hello today, please, in about 30 seconds or less, give us your name. This week, I'd love to hear what your favorite plant is to grow, indoor or outdoor. We're agnostic here. And then the next slide, there'll be an opportunity to, or if you did actually have a chance to complete the homework from last week, which was about how you're going to use microbes in your garden this year, then we'd love to hear that. So to speak up, you do need to put your hand up. And you do that by at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is an emoji. I believe it's a happy face. And if you click on that, one of the options is a hand, which will raise your hand, and then I will call on you, at which point you can unmute your mic. Other than that, please do ensure that your mic stays muted for everyone's ears. And so we'll start with Jane, and you were quick to the mark there. So Jane, why don't you start with your introduction?
All right, well, it's Jane. I live in a condo, no balcony or anything, so I'm making do what I can do with plant stands and everything. I have a Stapelia. It's a succulent, and for the life of me, I can't get it. It flowered once, and it did smell like rotten meat because that's what they're supposed to do. And I haven't been able to get them to flower since. I repotted it in a bigger pot and everything, divided them a bit, and what am I doing wrong? Is it the lights? I got grow lights too. I put on at nighttime. So I don't know.
You're wondering, yeah. So it's interesting because succulents, are often considered to be great beginner level plants. Certainly, they require less care than other plants. But in my experience, after that initial honeymoon phase, if we'll call it that, they actually do get harder to look after. And that is in part because they are a type of cactus plant. In fact, they really don't like a lot of moisture, which especially for beginner growers, we have a tendency to overwater our plants. And then this issue around flowering as well. So I'm sure Kat can provide some additional research into the chat. One thing we do know is that if a plant doesn't have access to the right microbial partners or relationships, then in fact it won't flower. And that is because when a plant flowers, that is its reproductive mechanism. And it really only is instigated to go into reproductive mode when it can sense that the soil has enough microbial life and therefore enough access to nutrients that it can support more population. So it's really important. Often we don't realize, we see a flower, we're like, oh, it's so beautiful, but in fact this is the plant ultimately telling us that it's happy in the substrate, in the soil where it is located, and that it recognizes that it's getting everything that it needs, and there's all of that in excess. So I would be interested at a later point, Jane, or perhaps put it in the chat, we'll talk about it at the Q&A, to know what kind of substrate or material you did repot into, whether that had those microbial partners that would help encourage that blooming. And I have to plug my own product here, the worm manure. One of the things we hear time and time again, that within a couple of weeks of being applied to a plant, a lot of people have heirloom plants that they've inherited that haven't flowered for years and years and years. And then within a number of weeks, that plant starts flowering, and that's a direct result of those microbes. So certainly an interesting topic. And Kat, perhaps we can flag succulent health and growth as a topic for a webinar onto itself.
Thank you.
Now, thank you, Jade. And thank you for your reoccurring attendance as well. So Kate, I see your hand is up there. Kate Henderson, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can give us a quick intro as well, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for including me. Brand new to gardening, did not grow up with it at all. I live in Toronto. You'll see I'm in my office right now, which is an industrial building in the west end of Toronto. But we recently bought a property out near Lake Huron, and the people who owned it before us had a beautiful garden. So the master gardeners. And so I inherited that. And so we've had about 2 years, and I'm slowly adding a bunch of native species, native wildflowers, trying to encourage pollinators and all that kind of thing. And tangentially, am very interested now in soil health and analyzing what kind of soil we have and how to make it better, and composting and all that stuff. And you'll see behind me, I've actually started trying to ecologically, in a sound ecological way, harvest herbs, flowering herbs and flowers to make dried arrangements as part of my semi-retirement hobby and business plan. So it's nice to meet you all. I'm just looking for general knowledge. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's a great story. You're so lucky to have come into that beautiful garden.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate that often if someone comes from a traditional gardening background, let's say, and they're not as familiar with the new science of soil, which is what we talk about, they're not necessarily using the native species. They're not necessarily looking after the soil in the way that they could be, probably using toxic chemicals, unfortunately. So
Probably.
you'll have some remediation work to do, but it sounds like you're on the right track.
Yeah. You asked about favorite plants too, and my current favorite is in the native grasses, it's pathrush. I love pathrush. I'm obsessed with it. It's so beautiful. And I planted some along our pathway and it seems to be doing well. It's hard to tell in the winter, but we'll see what happens in the spring.
That's awesome. I saw Kat give you a smile there. She's an herbalist and she's also really passionate about native species. So
Nice.
she's very pleased to hear that for sure. Well, thank you, Kate.
Amazing.
I'm so glad
Yep.
you're here
Thanks.
and looking forward to sharing my knowledge with you.
Great.
So awesome. Okay, and then we have one more intro from Brian. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and say hello?
Hi, my name is Brian. I'm from Toronto. My favorite plant to grow is, although I do grow a variety of vegetables, my favorite has always been tomatoes. I've been at this a few years now, but recently I've got into paying a little more attention to how my garden is fertilized. For the last couple of years, I've been applying a fertilizer, a poultry litter fertilizer, to my garden in the fall. And then, other than a few things that go into the planting hole in the spring, that's pretty much been it. So I guess my question is, if I'm applying this poultry litter to my garden in the fall, obviously the microbes in that will be of some benefit, I'm sure. But I was looking at perhaps adding some of your worm fertilizer to when I'm putting my seedlings in the ground, so in the planting hole. My question is, am I overdoing it too much? In other words, if and I was careful not to use too much of this concentrated turkey litter back in the fall. So my garden is, I'm hoping, somewhat taken care of there, but I just don't want to overdo it this spring. So should I just plant everything straight in the ground with maybe a little bit of bone meal and so on? Or should I actually add some more of your product? Just, I guess a handful is what you're recommending.
For sure.
So I don't overdo it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. So let me start by saying you're doing a lot of things really well. And so kudos to you. I love that you're using a compost product in the fall, which traditionally people don't appreciate is actually a really, really excellent time to be using amendments, because all the goodness that you're adding is then able to be incorporated by the microbial life through the winter. There's a film where the snow and the soil meet, and all that good work happens. So it is important though to appreciate a few other things. So a turkey litter or a compost made from poultry manure, Actisol is probably the brand name some people would be hen manure would be familiar with, is unique. It is a manure you can use that doesn't need to be cured. Most manure, like a horse manure, you can't use right away. So the real benefit from a poultry litter is that it is high in nitrogen, and that is excellent. You're getting that important nutrient into your soil by adding it. However, it is not technically considered a biological amendment. It is organic, it is natural, but there isn't a wide diversity of microbial life in that product. That's just not what it does. So that is really where the worm manure and the products that I create can work really well alongside others. And so with our products, what you're adding is that microbial diversity that can then, for example, transform unavailable nitrogen into the plant available format or the soluble format that then can be put to use. So you're right on target in terms of suggesting that adding some into the hole when you transplant is going to be effective. The nice thing is, because these products are natural, because the Jocelyn Soil Booster line of products is regenerative and microbial based, there's no such thing as too much. You're never going to burn your plants. They're not toxic.
Yeah.
There is a threshold beyond which adding more, you're not really gaining additional value. Generally, the up to about 30% is considered beneficial. But what I always say is, even 5% is going to do quite a lot for you. So definitely, it's not about quantity; it's about quality. And I would recommend that you'd want to be looking at adding that type of a amendment when you're planting. And actually, we're going to just get into right now why that's going to be beneficial for you as it relates to your garden this spring.
Okay, so that would also be applicable to top dressing then later in the season. Like if I want to top dress with your worm manure.
For sure. And for those of you who are newer to the club here, top dressing is a term for when you apply an amendment on top of your soil. You don't have to work it in or put it in the hole before transplanting. So definitely, again, another benefit of the worm manure is that you're able to use it in a variety of different fashions. So great. Well, thank you, Brian.
A handful as well. A handful.
That's very helpful.
Well.
Yeah, you know what, Brian, sorry, I'm just looking at my time here and I see that I'm running already late. If you don't mind, feel free, any further questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them later, or Kat will be able to as well help with that.
Thank you so much.
With my pleasure. And so on that note, let's get into our next slide. And this is the recap. So if you haven't been here before, what's important to appreciate as we move forward today is that healthy soil needs to be full of living biology to create the conditions or provide plants with the nutrients they need to be healthy and successful. And so the way to appreciate this is that plants and the microbes, or the biology in soil, have a synergistic relationship whereby the bigger and the stronger the plant gets, the more photosynthesis it's able to perform, which creates a carbon sugar molecule, which then is excreted into the soil to feed the microbes. It also serves as a communication language with those microbes, who then respond on demand with whatever the plant has requested at that particular moment. The microbes go farther out than the roots could ever reach. They find those nutrients, they bring them back to the plant, they hand them over to the plant, and in exchange, they get more carbohydrate sugar. In turn, the plant grows bigger, can perform more photosynthesis, and the microbial population is also able to grow and be more healthy. So it becomes a positive feedback cycle. An easy analogy to appreciate is that the microbes are like the pizza delivery boys of the soil. The plant will call in their request for a certain type of pizza. And as long as the pizza delivery boy, the right type of pizza delivery boy, is ready and waiting, then they will be able to execute and deliver on that request. We run into problems if the soil is missing this biology, or is missing the wide diversity of biology that's required, because every microbe has a very niche role, and they really can only fulfill that particular one or two roles. So if soil has been treated with chemicals which are toxic to life, including the microbes, and us of course as well, then likely the diversity, the ecosystem is not particularly strong. If the soil has been damaged through tillage or digging, then it's also going to be, it's just not going to have that diversity of microbial life. And ultimately, that's what makes the Jocelyn Soil Booster brand of products so special, is it's able to kickstart this natural ecosystem. It's able to replenish Mother Nature's natural partnerships, and ultimately improve plant ecosystems over time. And that's the definition of regeneration or regenerative growing, is that year in and year out, the soil and the entire ecosystem is getting better and better and better. So we do have some homework from last week. I know there was a number of folks that were looking to put microbes to use in their soil. I think, given I'm looking at the time now, I'm not going to take any offers for feedback on this. However, what I will say is that we have started posting these sessions after the fact on our website. So if you miss a session, or if you're new this week and want to catch up from last week and understand how particular microbes or particular regenerative practices can solve some of your challenges in your growing space, then I'm sure Kat will throw the link to that in the chat, and you'll be able to review those sessions after the fact. Of course, because the promotional discount is only available for a few hours after the session, you won't have access there. So certainly we'd love to continue to see you attend in person. So today we're talking specifically about starting seeds. And as I said, is a really great activity to carry out at this time of the year. And I wanted to start with a brief overview in case there are folks, I'm sure there are, that have really never done this. This is often not our first point of entry into growing or gardening. Usually we come by it more honestly, and then a few years in, we start to appreciate that we could potentially be starting on some of our own seeds. We kind of get addicted. And actually, I saw a great quote earlier today that said that within every grower, there's a child that believes in the seed fairy. And if you've never started your own seeds, then it just gives you a bit of the taste of the magic that comes from this process. So at a high level, essentially what we're talking about is you start your seeds in a media, and we're going to talk about what makes a good media, and you're keeping them warm, generally warmer than ambient air temperature, which is an important point that we're going to touch on. You're keeping them moist. The moisture level is critical. Their seeds and seedlings are very, very dependent on the right moisture levels. Most seeds do like to be dark, although there are some seeds that need light to germinate. And then once they've germinated, all seeds need a large amount of light. And again, one of the easiest mistakes to make when you're starting out is to not provide your seedlings with enough light once they've germinated. And what happens is they end up reaching towards whatever light is available. They get leggy, and they're putting effort and resources into growing tall rather than the effort into establishing a strong root system, which is what they should be doing at that stage. Usually in this process, I would say almost always, you're transferring or potting up that seedling at least once, sometimes twice or thrice, until the temperature and the seedling itself is appropriate to transplant it into its forever home for that season. So a few key things to understand: not all seeds like to be started, and ultimately that's a result of the fact that many seeds don't like to be, or some crops or some plants don't like to be transplanted. So if a particular plant doesn't like to be transplanted, then you really wouldn't want to start those seeds anywhere than in its forever home, where it's going to live permanently. And there are a number of seeds that require pre-soaking, and we're going to go into that. Now, a big thing when you're starting your seeds, and this is really the first step, is to look at the timing. And that's because different seeds, even different varietals of the same type of plant, and if you're not familiar, varietals speaks to this idea that there are tomatoes, and then there are 100 different subspecies of or type of tomato. And I'm not, there's cherry tomatoes, of course, but even within cherry tomatoes, there's dozens and dozens of different varietals of cherry tomatoes, and they can have different germination speeds. So that would be the speed at which the seed goes from being a seed to actually opening up to being a seedling. And they can also have different timelines for when, from when they germinate to when they're ready for transplanting. All of that comes down to this map. So this is really an important piece to grasp as you become more well-versed in your growing activities. This is called a plant hardiness zone map. So first thing to appreciate is that Canada and the US, they use different plant hardiness zones. They do not correlate, the numbers don't match, so make sure you're looking at a Canadian version. And it's really dependent on where you are located. So I have a feeling Kat's going to throw a hot link into the chat where you can look closely, because you certainly can't quite zoom in enough on this particular map to see where you are. But what this map will be able to tell you is, generally in the past, based on past years, when was the last frost of the year, and when we anticipate the first frost of the year. So in this case, when we're talking about starting our own seeds, we're really concerned about the last frost, which indicates when you'll be in a position to then plant those heat lover crops, which is often the ones that we like to start indoors early. And one of the reasons for that is that if we can maximize the growth of that heat lover seedling and then get it into the ground outside right in time to miss our final frost, then you are going to have the longest possible growing season available to you, and ultimately the biggest, healthiest, highest yielding plants. So this is a really important piece to dig into and look into based on your particular location. One thing to understand, so 0 is the coldest areas. You can probably figure that out, the dark blue. And then it does go up to 8, which is the warmest. I do understand that the Environment Canada is actually about to come out with a new zone map. I'm not sure exactly when. My understanding is that is going to accommodate some of the changes we're seeing as a result of the climate crisis that's really thrown our first and last frost dates askew. I've also heard that on the West Coast, they may in fact have to create a new zone, a 9 zone, because it's so hot and dry out there now, which is a bit scary. But that generally, the zone that this map places us in, we're going to probably move a half a zone up, so warmer. And so the zones are split into A and B. And you can remember the difference between A and B. A is for aggressive, B is for better. So that's not really what they stand for, I don't think, but that's how I remember it. So zone 5A is in fact colder than zone 5B. And zone 5A would have a later final frost date than zone B. So those little differences are important to note as well. Once you know what zone you are in, you can correlate it with the crops that you'd like to grow, and also then anticipate when you want to be transplanting those crops into your garden. So there are a number of crops, we won't go into it right now, but that are happy to be transplanted or in fact can start being directly sown in the spring as soon as the soil is no longer frozen. A lot of the brassicas like broccoli, cabbage, kohlrabi, they generally don't like to be transplanted and they want to be direct sown, and they also like the cool weather. So you either grow them in the spring or you grow them in the fall. Don't try growing them in the summer. I made that mistake early on. And then of course there are other plants that really can't go out until the warmer weather arrives. So you do want to look at this type of a seeding calendar once you've established which crops you're hoping to grow this season. So in terms of why you want to start your seeds, there's a lot of good reasons. So I mentioned it's fun. There's this magic. Every day you go there. Oh, is there new seedlings? And when you first start popping up, it's like Christmas or something. It's so exciting. And then you get to look after them and baby them. It allows you to pick particular types of crops. So if there's a specific type of tomato that you want to try, you can be sure you have access to it by ordering the seeds. And then whereas if you're buying your seedlings later in the season, you won't necessarily have the same ability to pick and choose. You can use a preferred seed supplier that meets some of your criteria. And certainly you can time the growth of your seedlings well to maximize your particular zone. And you can avoid all that bad plastic that we see that our seedlings are sold in, that black plastic that is not recyclable. We'll get away from that by starting your own seeds. There are downsides, of course, and some of them are, I mean, you do save money, you do save cash in the sense that seeds are really relatively inexpensive. You get a lot for a little, and however, you more than pay for it in terms of your labor and effort. So if you're short on time, but rich with funds, then probably you want to stick with buying your seedlings from the garden center. But if you enjoy that kind of work, if it's part of your love of growing, then by all means, that's going to work well for you. You do need a fair amount of space. And more importantly, you need access to really good light, as I mentioned before. That is critical. Do not make the mistake of thinking that you can get by with some mediocre lighting, because there's really nothing more disappointing than working for a month, having your babies germinate and potting them up, only then in the final few weeks to realize that they've grown terribly leggy, and a lot of your hard work has gone to waste. They are touchy, so if you're not careful, if you go away for a number of days and it dries out, you can potentially again lose the work you put into them. And if you are, for example, an urban grower, like so many of us are, you order a seed pack, you might get 100 seeds. Well, you really only need 2 or 3 or maybe 5 of those if your failure rate is 50%. So you get a lot of seeds. So generally, I recommend, pick a few crops or plants that you want to try. Make sure you have enough room, and then just buy the rest. And generally, if there's unique or hard to find types of plants, then those would be the ones to focus your own seed starting efforts on. Speaking of sourcing your seeds, there's lots of different options. I'm not going to review all of them, but feel free to screenshot this page, or Kat, perhaps you can copy and paste it and throw it in the chat. And we definitely recommend that you want to choose local seeds to the best of your ability. One of the best ways to do that is through attending a CD Saturday, and right now is when they're all happening. I'll be present at the Evergreen Brickwork CD Saturday on March the 2nd. And there is a database, I can't remember right now, but if you Google it, you can find there's a database of all the CD Saturdays or CD Sundays that are planned. And I think you can filter them by your location. I've also added some recommendation for small seed providers that have a higher quality or heirloom seeds. And this is really interesting. I just recently learned this. So what the science is showing or is finding now is that a lot of the seeds, the non-heirloom seeds, so we're looking at things like GMO seeds that are designer seeds or designer crops, the plant that germinates and is grown from that seed is so removed from its natural tendencies and its natural environment that they're finding that those plants cannot interact with the normal natural soil microbes to the same extent that heirloom seeds and plants can. And so this is very direct evidence that GMO seed may be more pest resistant, it might germinate and grow faster, but there's always a cost. And what we're learning now is that those microbial partnerships are, it turns out that those in fact might be the cost of using those designer seeds. So buyer beware when you're picking which seeds you're going to use. Another important point, I already mentioned that not all seeds can be started indoors and transplanted. So for example, on the right, you have seeds that you really want to direct sow, which means you're growing them, you're starting them where they're going to live. So carrots, for example, or all the brassicas, don't bother starting them inside. There's certain seeds that are easier versus other that are considered more advanced. Often the more advanced seeds have particular issues, like perhaps they're very small, which doesn't seem like a big deal until you try and individually pick out those seeds and you're dropping them on the ground and losing them, and it actually becomes quite challenging. You can't see how many you put in your particular pot, and then there's also seeds that are even more sensitive to moisture level or heat levels that really take an advanced level expertise. So if it's the first time you're starting this, I would say, pick from the list the easier ones, and then save the more advanced ones for next year. What you need to start your seeds, first and foremost, you need your seed starting substrate, which in our case is a soil. And one of the most important things about a seed starting soil is that it needs to be incredibly light and fluffy. And that's because if the soil itself is too dense, too heavy, then in fact it prevents that seed from, or at least it forces that seed to take longer to germinate. It prevents it from fully establishing its root system as well as it could. And so often what you'll see out in the market are particular seed starting mixes, which are different than a traditional potting soil mix. And the main two differences, one is that your seed starting mix is going to be fluffier. It's likely going to have more volcanic moisture holding minerals like vermiculite or perlite, which also help with that aeration. And a seed starting mix would also not have those toxic chemical fertilizers. And that is because the seeds are very sensitive to those chemicals. Now, the cool thing is, if you were here last week, you already know this, the raw and regenerative potting soil that we sell is in fact suitable for seed starting. And as far as I know, this is the only potting soil on the market that can claim to be suitable from seed starting through seedling growth, through sustaining that plant for the whole season with all the nutrients it needs. And that is ultimately because the consistency of our soil is relatively light and fluffy, but more importantly, it has those living microbes that a seed needs. So it used to be thought that a seed only starts working with its microbial partners once it's germinated, once it's broken out of its shell. However, the latest research is in fact showing that from within the seed shell, the plant itself can sense if the right microbes are ready and waiting. And if we think about it intuitively, given how much we've learned, even just over these last few weeks together, about seeds, plants' ability to recognize the microbial partners in their environment, it also makes sense that a seed would only want to germinate when it knows that it has the resources and the synergistic partners ready and waiting and available to deliver those on-demand nutrients it needs. And again, through the different stages of growth, a seed or a seedling or a plant needs different partners. It needs different nutrients, and therefore it needs different microbial partners to work with. So one of the really cool products that we offer is, in fact, a compost tea, so that you can pre-soak your seeds, cover them in those microbes, and plant them in whatever soil, or I don't want to say whatever soil, but at least soil that perhaps doesn't otherwise have living microbes, and still ensure a good, strong germination rate and a good, strong seedling growth. And so we're going to look at that in a moment. But regardless, you need your substrate, your soil mix that you're going to start with. You can also make your own seed starting soil. And certainly if you throw a quick question into Google, you'll find lots of options for that. And again, the only caveat there is make sure you're getting microbes into that mix, whether you're adding some worm manure or you're soaking your seeds in a compost tea product like ours. Then you need your trays or your pots or whatever you're using that's going to hold your seedling. Egg containers certainly work, although they kind of get soggy, so you do want to sort of put them in some other kind of a. Personally, I think the best thing and a great use for an item that doesn't have a lot of other good uses are takeout containers, especially not black plastic, which we can't recycle. They, with a few poked holes on the bottom, are really ideal, because what you can do is start your seeds in there, and often they have that clear lid, which you would want to have to create a greenhouse effect and keep the moisture level inside. And again, because seed starting is very sensitive to moisture levels, you always want to have some kind of cover. You want to be able to label your seeds, and of course you need the seeds themselves. So let's get down to I was going to say brass seeds maybe, and figure out how this works. So first things first, you do want to carefully know the specifics associated with the seed that you're starting. As I mentioned, they're all a little bit unique, a little bit different, and some need to be planted deeper than normal. Some like to be closer to the surface, and then it's also good to know if they take a really long time, so that you don't give up on them, and then the temperature that they prefer, because with seed starting, there'll be an ideal temperature that will maximize the speed of the germination. Doesn't mean that they won't germinate at a lower temperature, but it will take longer. So again, if you want to be as efficient as possible, you do want to know what that temperature is. You want to prep your soil, and ultimately you want that soil to be the consistency of a wet sponge. So if you squeeze the soil, you're getting quite a few drops of water out. And that's a little bit wetter than what we necessarily intuitively appreciate or would generally have for a container plant or for the rest of the year. And then again, it's just because that they're so sensitive to that moisture level. Fill your container about 2/3 full of your soil mix, and then you have a few options for how you plant your seeds. If you have individual containers, or you can throw a few seeds into each one. Here's a beginner's tip to avoid. Don't just put one seed in each pot. Different seeds will have different failure rate. In fact, usually on your seed packet, it'll say what the expected germination rate will be. Sometimes it is as low as 50%. Often it's sort of more in the 80% column. But to save yourself from putting in a lot of work only 3 weeks later to learn that half your seeds didn't start and now you run out of time, cover your bases by putting at least a few seeds in each pot. If they all grow, you can transplant them separately later. After I'd been doing this for a couple years, I learned that there was in fact an easier way to start seeds, especially if you're doing quite a few. and that is a broadcast application. So what that means is if you have your takeout, your rectangular takeout container, you can, instead of individually planting each seed in that container, you can in fact just sprinkle as evenly as you can, but without too much careful work. You can sprinkle those seeds and really increase the likelihood you're going to have a good germination rate, and reduce the amount of initial time required to get your seedlings germinated. So you do save time up front by doing that, especially if you have a seed that has a very low germination rate. This is a great way to do it, because ultimately what will happen is the seedlings will start to come up, and then the biggest, strongest ones you can then transplant in or pot up to the next level to continue to grow. So that is a great way to do it if you have the space and you have a lot that you're working with. One way to get microbes into your soil mix and make sure they're ready and waiting to encourage that germination is to cover your seeds with worm manure. And that's what we do. And you would cover it, whether you're using worm manure or just more of your seed starting mix. You do want to read about what depth that seed likes to be covered. That will alternate, and you can use the worm manure in place as in one for one ratio for the seed starting mix that you'd otherwise use to cover that seed. Tip 6, it seems obvious that you're going to want to label, but I have made this mistake, and it's especially easy if you're growing different varieties of tomatoes or something. But even if you're growing, only one type of tomato and one type of cucumber and one type of pepper, seedlings look identical, and they look identical for a long time. So do not assume that you are going to be able to tell after the fact which seedling is where, or which tray or container has which type of seeds. And often you end up shifting them around a bunch when you're watering them or getting them under the light. So don't even, rely on sort of a visual map. You really, really, really want to label that tray or that particular container with the type of seed and the varietal. And also the date is useful as well, because at some point you're going to want to cut your losses on any of your seeds that didn't germinate. And if you know the date, the exact date, then it's easier to feel confident that you've had a failed germination. As I mentioned, then you're going to want to cover it, and ideally a see-through cover will help keep moisture in and also create a bit of a greenhouse effect. And that's because we do want to keep those seeds generally warmer than ambient temperature. And another way to do that is through a heat mat, which you saw on the previous page there. It can be ordered online, which is just like a little heating pad. In fact, I guess you could probably use a heating pad, but I don't know. It needs to be on all the time, and you rest your container on that, and it radiates heat into your seedlings until they germinate. Once they've germinated, the temperature, they can sort of withstand slightly lower temperatures. The best part, but perhaps also the most labor-intensive part, is you do need to check on your seeds daily. And it's exciting because when they start germinating, there's new things happening every day, but it can be a little bit tedious, especially if it's a longer germination period. And you are constantly checking that. Really what you're checking is for that moisture level, to know that there is adequate moisture in that soil. An easy mistake to make is to think that, you've started your seeds, it was nice and moist, and then, they're not going to germinate for a couple of days, so I'm going to go away for the weekend. And you'll come back and it'll just have dried out too much. And then you're adding a bunch of water and you're like, it'll be fine. It won't be fine. Sorry, you missed your chance. So moisture is really, really key to monitor. Ideally, you're bottom watering. So if there's a way to set up your container and have an underneath tray so you can water from underneath, that is going to be really helpful. However, it is important that seedlings get exposed to environmental conditions. And I realize that we forgot to include this here, Kat, but in nature, when a seedling comes up, it's automatically exposed to rainfall, wind, and those environmental conditions actually strengthen the seedling itself. A windy location will encourage stronger and more extensive root growth, which ultimately creates a healthier plant down the road. And so you do kind of want to replicate some of those in your indoor starting space, because if your seedling doesn't get exposed to those early on, it's sort of like it's being raised with a silver spoon in its mouth. And then when it gets put out in the real world, it's just not, it's in fact too late for it to really grow that strong root system that will allow it to withstand a really breezy storm, or accommodate, what real life is like outdoors. So again, make sure your seedlings are going to be getting enough light, 12 to 16 hours a day, ideally. Don't make the mistake of just thinking that a single window is going to be enough, or that you can turn it around every day. You really likely need a set of grow lights to really be as effective as possible. At some point, you're going to pot them up. That is ultimately dependent on a few factors: how many seeds germinated in a particular container, how many weeks it's been. Generally, one of the rules you can use as a rule of thumb is once the seedling has its first 2 real leaves. So a seedling comes up and puts out its first 2 leaves. And these are not its real leaves. And that's why they all look the same. They all have this first set of leaves that are really good at photosynthesizing, getting lots of energy to the plant. And it's only after that that they start, for example, a tomato will start putting out that classic tomato shape leaf. Once those 2 classic tomato shape leaves are out, that's a sign that your seedling has developed a strong enough root system, and it can be potted up to a larger container for further growth. If you don't do that, you run the risk of creating seedlings that are root bound. Ultimately, their root systems are not big or strong enough, and you're going to hamper the full season of success that you were hoping for. The last step is part of transplanting, and we're not going to go into it now, but you do need to acclimatize your babied seedlings to outdoor real life over a period of time. And there is a specific way that you do that, and we'll have a future session where we talk about that. I think I've already mentioned most of these mistakes, and I know we're running out of time. I just want to make sure we don't forget anything. Some seeds do require pre-soaking. So a lot of like the legume seeds must be pre-soaked. Otherwise they don't really they won't germinate. We talked about that. Okay, so homework for today is to think about which crops you want to start from seed. And then to look into when you should be starting those seeds. So you're basically going to backcast. You're going to look at your transplant date out into your garden based on your final frost date. Then you're going to backcast from there. How long does that seedling need to be growing to get established? And then from there, how long does it take for the seed itself to germinate? And then from there, you arrive at the ideal time for when you should be starting those particular seeds. And then I do want you to be thinking about how much space and lighting you need for those seedlings. It's a very common beginner mistake to not realize that a tiny little tray with 20 seeds is going to end up needing 3 full shelves once they have reached a larger size. So quickly before we go to the Q&A, I do want to mention the Soil Aid Tea Kit. And this is a really cool product that we have. and it allows you to make your own compost tea. And it is really great value. It comes with the 2 bags of worm manure. It comes with our proprietary microbial feed mix and the tea bags and the instructions. And what this allows you to do is to create a tea full of microbial life. You can soak your seeds and then plant them. But then you can also use this product all season long. And the nice thing about this versus just the worm manure by itself is it creates a liquid natural fertilizer, which can be advantageous if that's the way you like to water your plants. It can also be used as a foliar spray to spray your plant with microbial goodness. And so there's lots of different ways, really good value from this product. And it's also fun because when you make it, it turns this really dark, rich, beautiful color. And so today, until 11:59 tonight, we have the promo offer. You do in fact end up saving $25 off this product. You're going to save $10 off the cost, and then you're also going to save the shipping. So even though it would normally bring you below our minimum free shipping level, we're giving you the two for deal here, where you save $10 and you still get the free shipping. So a total of $25 savings. You're going to want to enter the discount code SEEDS24, all one word, at checkout to access that saving. So I know we're at time now. I'm sure we have questions in the chat, so I am going to stick around for another 10 minutes or so and at least get to some of those questions. But I do encourage you, if you haven't, sign up for our newsletter. Next week, as I mentioned, we are going to be looking at really figuring out which plants you want to grow this season, so that you can order your seeds and get your seeds started, and how you're going to partner those plants together to maximize the microbial interactions. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. And on that note, I'm going to stop sharing, and I think what I will do is Kat, can you direct us to some questions from the chat, please?
Yes, so we had the first question was from Debbie. Can you winter sow vegetables other than warm weather vegetables?
Can you winter sow so winter sowing, well, there's a couple different types of winter sowing. There is overwintering. So there are select crops that you can actually sow in the fall. So in particular, things like onions. Also, onions in particular are very good for this, but I've also had success with cold leafy greens, so things like bok choy, and you can actually plant the seeds in the fall, and they'll sort of hang out through the winter, and then as soon as they're capable in the spring, they'll germinate. So it's one of the most efficient ways to get in as early a crop as possible. The other option is that you can, as soon as the soil is workable, feed some plants or crops that will then germinate. So those are your cold weather plants. Usually we're looking at leafy greens, and you know, sometimes folks are like, oh, leafy greens are boring, I don't want more lettuce. But there's actually quite a few different varietals that fall within that subgrouping. There is your standard lettuce and similar and the like, but there is also a lot of non-traditional leafy greens, like this idea of pak choi, which is one of my personal favorites because it grows really quickly, and it's one of the most versatile crops for that early spring harvest. So by all means, you can do both, but you do have to be quite particular with the types of plants that are willing to do that. My understanding as well, so the way I've had the most success with that is to do it in some kind of a cold frame or a hoop house or a greenhouse. And what that allows is in the spring, the soil is warming up more quickly than if, because of the greenhouse effect, than it was if it was just directly outdoors. So those would be my suggestions around winter or early spring seed sowing.
Right, next question was from Sue. Was any concern that the roots will get tangled if you multi-sow in one large container?
Thank you. That was a really great question. Sorry, was that Sue who asked that? I can't see.
Yeah.
You know what? I think that question is worthy of our giveaway prize, Kat. So I don't think Sue's won our giveaway yet. So congratulations, Sue. I love that question because it's a really good point that I missed. And please direct message your address to Kat there. We'll ship that bag of worm manure out to you. So if you are broadcast sowing or multiple seeds germinate in one pot, you do need to be careful when you are separating those seedlings. And ultimately, you want to very gently untangle those roots, because the answer is yes, they will get intertangled, intermeshed. And there's some science to suggest that's actually a good thing. They're sharing nutrients, they're sharing microbes, they're working together. But what it means is a few things. First, you may want to pot them up a little bit earlier than you would otherwise to just reduce how intermingled or intertangled they are. And then you do need to very, very carefully separate them out without damaging the roots too much. I mean, inevitably there's going to be a little bit of damage, but you do want to minimize that. And one way to do that is, in fact, when you hold the Kat, correct me if I'm wrong, I might be having a blank here, but when you're handling your seedlings, you do want to handle them by the leaf. Can you correct me, Kat? I think that's right. I'm blanking a little bit. It's been about 12 months since I've started the seeds, but generally, our intention would be, oh, well, I'll hold it by the stem, but in fact, that is incorrect. You do actually want to hold it by the leaf and very gently dissect. Another good tip is that if you're separating out your seedlings, it's useful to have like a sharp implement, like a pencil or something, a chopstick, and that will actually allow you to sort of gently pry that seedling out very gently, and allow you to then grasp the leaf and very delicately pull those out. So really great question, Sue. Thank you. That's important for everyone to appreciate.
Yeah, that's correct, Joss. Okay,
How are we looking
next
there?
question. So we have another question from Shannon. Some seed packets I have say to sow indoors and lightly cover with vermiculite. Can I use worm manure instead of vermiculite? So I did say that some plants do need light to germinate, so it's best for those to put the worm manure at the bottom of the seeds.
Yeah, so that would be certainly if a seed package is particular about vermiculite, and vermiculite is one of these. It is natural. It is a volcanic mineral that has been gone through a high heat process to expand. It's very porous. It holds a lot of water, but ultimately it is also going to allow light to get through. And it may also be related to the strength of that seedling or the ability of that seedling to break through the crust of the soil, the top of the soil to achieve light. So Kat's right. One way to get the microbes in there would be to either have the worm manure incorporated into the substrate, or potentially you could also soak the seeds initially in the soil aid tea kit or the compost tea that's colloquially known, and then that would also ensure you're getting those microbes where they need to be.
Okay, and then next question is there any way to measure nutrients in worm compost or soil at home?
This is definitely something that we get asked all the time. People are eager to know what the nutrient level is of their soil. I've seen one or two sort of at-home soil testing kits. I'm blanking. There is one available. There's a Canadian one that is available. Pat might be able to quickly find it. And that is one that gives you some indication roughly of what the nutrient level is. Other than that, at home, unfortunately, you're mostly reliant on qualitative data, not quantitative data. So that's sort of like observations around the color of the soil. You can hold your soil, like take a handful of soil in your hand and pour water over it. And if it just sort of quickly runs through your hands, dissolves, disappears, then chances your soil isn't very healthy. Good healthy soil should sort of clump together, and some of it will sort of dissipate, but it shouldn't all just disappear immediately. Keep in mind though that the big chemical companies have sort of directed people to think that, first of all, nutrients are the most important thing, and I would certainly argue, and other webinars would go to show this, that nutrient accessibility is directly a result of the amount of microbial life. And even if you were to send your soil for professional nutrient testing, which is possible, it costs about $100. What they're only measuring soluble nutrient levels, or plant available nutrient levels. And what's necessary to understand there is that soluble nutrients are dissolved in water, so they can be taken up by the plant immediately. However, they dissolve in water. So if it rains or you water your soil, they essentially leach out. So one of my missions in life is to get people away from really thinking specifically or only about nutrient levels, and instead appreciating, and Dr. Elaine Ingham, who's the grandmother of regenerative growing and the soil food web, says that there's no soil in the world that is short on nutrients. So nutrient levels really aren't your problem or aren't the issue. It's soil is short on the biology that plants require to access those nutrients on an ongoing basis. And that's because it's only the biology that can take a mineral like a sand particle or clay particle and extract the nutrients. So let's say the calcium or the potassium or the boron or whatever, the dozens of micronutrients that plants need. It's only biology that is able to pull that nutrient out of the mineral component and then transform it into the bioavailable format that plants require to be healthy, or to require to uptake that nutrient and use it themselves. So again, when we're assessing quality of soil or amendments, we can look at the nutrient level, but it is not giving the whole story. And in fact, I would argue that it's really only giving a small piece of the story. We got time for one more?
One more question. Can all seeds, even tiny pelleted ones, be soaked in the tea? From Shannon.
Yes, so all seeds can be soaked. And in fact, so one of the smallest seeds, are carrot seeds, are very small. And I learned, I don't know, I think it was last fall, I learned that farmers, in fact, soak their carrot seeds. And I hadn't heard of that being done before. But what they find is that the germination rate is greatly accelerated if and when they do that. The caveat, I should have mentioned this earlier, the caveat is that if you soak your seeds, you're essentially starting the germination process. So you don't want to soak your seed and then be waiting a couple of weeks. You effectively want to soak your seed, and within You can let them dry out a little bit, because when they dry out, you can handle them better. And the microbes will go dormant and coat them. But you wouldn't want to, you've effectively, the seed is then going to start germinating. So I would say within about 24 hours of finishing that seed soak and the drying, you do in fact want to be able to plant those seeds. So note for us, Kat, to add that to the slide deck for next year.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm not sure, I know there's a few of you left. I appreciate you sticking around to the end. Looking forward to chatting more next week, and we'll see you then. Bye for now.